Hey there, it's your boo thing, AliasReads. I wanted to say thank you for coming back to listen to more of my narrations, and hello there to specifically you, first-time listener. To my bedtime people, thank you for choosing my stories tonight. Remember to like and subscribe. It helps me out tremendously. If the words spiritual inhabitants from the other planes summoned by fan service means nothing to you, then be sure you go back and check out the first part. Last time we talked, I didn't do a great job of explaining things. So I'm going to do you some learning. When an inhab possesses a human, it starts out weak and annoying, but over time, the inhab grows stronger and slowly takes over their host's mind. Now, this normally takes over a month. After the inhab fully controls the mind, then it starts to transform the body, and in that process, it regains some of its power. This can happen, a few days after the mind is taken over, but it can take as long as a few months. We also know that there are groups or archetypes of inhabs. They all exhibit similar behaviors and transformations. Now I can tell you about the names I came up with for these inhabs. The heralds, they have these overcomplicated names for them. And it sounds like they're having a stroke every time they say one, so I'll be writing the names I have for them instead. So, you remember Dick Teeth, right? The inhab that was chewing on his severed... Well, I was lucky to run into that guy. He was a bone gnasher, haha, for us laymen, which makes his teeth grow uncontrollably. Bone gnashers normally end up eating themselves if there's nothing else living around. Now, that's really not that bad, especially when you learn about the Maw spawn or the Visceraith. But those are stories for another time. The next inhab was Jerome from my first contract with the Heralds, a 9-year-old boy that became possessed by the Dybbuk box spirit after he opened it. The one I dropped kicked off the banister, remember? Yep, that one. We were lucky that we got there as early as we did. He was a carrion ghoul. His indicators are emitting this foul odor that attracts flesh-eating insects. And once an insect bites the inhab, they fall under the inhab's control. He was still building his army of insects and developing. And now we're all caught up. Hi. How you doing? Good? Good. I'm glad you're here. This will be a story about my second contract with the Heralds and working with Father Garion. I fucking love Father Garion. You'll find out why soon. Oh, there you are, Father Gabriel said, motioning for me to sit down. His office was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting eerie shadows on the dark wood walls. I took a seat, already wondering when he'd cut to the chase. There's been a report of another disturbance. This time on the outskirts of a small town called Millwood. We believe it to be a Class 3 demon, he explained, his expression turning serious. Class 3? Isn't that the same as my first contract? I asked, trying to mask my anxiety with a tough voice. That is correct. This contract has the same assessed danger as your contract with the Carters, Father Gabriel said calmly. These demons are dangerous and have a high potential for mid-stage metamorphism. Someone with your unique skills should be able to handle it, Father Gabriel said, his eyes boring into mine. I will take that as a compliment, I said, unsure of if it really was or not. You'll meet Father Garion. He's a bit different from Father Ralph. More experienced and, I believe, more suited to your style, he said. Father Garion? Well, I've heard a bit about him. When do we leave? I asked. As soon as possible. Father Garion is already preparing the necessary equipment and will brief you in detail. You can find him in the main hall. Don't keep him waiting. Father Gabriel instructed. Got it, I said, standing up. Just remember, the world needs people like you, even if you don't see it that way. Good luck, and Godspeed, he said, his voice softening slightly. Yeah, I'll go meet Father Garion, I muttered, leaving his office and waving goodbye over my shoulder. Father Garion was waiting, surrounded by an array of bizarre-looking equipment. He looked up as I approached. Father Garion is this 6-foot-plus, leaned-out, model-looking-ass priest. He looks like he was sculpted by a very thirsty Michelangelo. Broad shoulders, chiseled face, 5 o'clock shadow, abs like a Greek god, and fucking gray eyes. What the fuck, Gary, and why are you so hot? You must be the one Father Gabriel mentioned, he said, extending a hand. His voice was as smooth as something very smooth. Sorry, I can't think of anything right now. Blinking away my reverie. Yeah, I replied, shaking his hand. Please listen closely, he said, turning back to the assortment of tools laid out before him. Our next contract takes us to the outskirts of Millwood, and we've had reports of a Class 3 possession. There have also been reports of missing corpses, he explained, his tone unbothered. Some demons can grow their strength by consuming the rotted flesh of the dead, and we assume that's what's happening in Millwood. Lovely, I muttered. So what's the plan? Father Garion handed me a thick dossier. Inside, you'll find all the details. We'll perform a full sweep of the area, locate the entity and neutralize it. We'll also be bringing some specialized equipment for this mission, as well as holy water and blessed blades and a few new tools I've been developing. I flipped through the dossier, skimming the detailed reports and maps. This looks thorough. We can't afford to miss anything, he replied, his voice stern. Preparation is key. I've also included some background on the previous incidents involving similar characteristics. We'll also have some footwork to do. I stayed quiet, realizing then that this would be very different from Ralph. I also didn't want to read the folder. I can't read, I said, and I tossed the folder on the table. When do we leave? Father Garion looked at me, one perfectly sculpted GigaChat eyebrow raised, and then he laughed so hard that he doubled over. I'm talking like red-faced with tears kind of laugh. After almost a minute, he finally started winding down from whatever the fuck that was. We'll leave as soon as you're ready, Father Garion said, packing the last of the equipment into the sturdy duffel bag. We should try to get there before nightfall. I slung my bag over my shoulder, feeling the weight of the extra gear. I'm ready, Gary. Let's skedaddle. Father Garion gave a curt nod and led the way out of the main hall. And Garion seemed like he might be a stickler for the rules. Very detail-oriented. I'm pretty sure Gabe got it all wrong. There's no way this guy and I were going to click. I sighed, resigning myself to another contract full of weird vibes. Garion noticed my deflation as we walked to the van. He reached out and grabbed my shoulder lightly yet firmly and asked me if everything was all right. I told him it was, brushing off his hand, and then loaded up my gear. We drove in silence. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of papers as they fell out of the dossier. So, Father Garion, I began. Gabe said you're more experienced than Father Ralph. I'm assuming that means you're also pretty by the book then. He glanced over at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. Is that what you think? Well, I guess, I shrugged, picking at some dirt under my nail. I mean, you seem pretty serious. Father Garion chuckled softly. I suppose I can come across that way, but let me tell you something. Rules are guidelines, not chains. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Coming from a herald, that's a bit surprising. He nodded, his smile widening. I've been doing this for a long time. I've learned that flexibility and intuition often serve better than a rigid adherence to the rules. Every situation is unique, and sometimes you have to adapt on the fly. Like, what do you mean? I asked, genuinely curious. Take the last mission I was on, he said, his tone casual. We were dealing with a venomous possession. The protocol would have us use a specific ritual to pacify it, but the situation was crumbling quickly. Instead of following the ritual to the letter, I improvised. Used a combination of holy water and an old binding spell I picked up from a different tradition. That was a buzzkill. Disinterested now, I replied. Oh, wow. As I leaned back in my seat, you're such a rebel. Did he not hear himself? It's basically by the book. That's not the end of it. Give me a sec, he said, waving away the negative funk. He looked ahead thoughtfully for a moment, and then continued the story. After I had the possessed contained, the final step was the exorcism. But the host died weeks before I got there, and the demon had fully matured. There was no man left. His gaze was straight ahead, but his mind was somewhere else. Well, that demon had some choice words to say, and look, I have all the patience in the world for my fellow man, and then his tone grew darker. "But I'll be damned if I let some demon disrespect me." He steadied himself, slowing his breathing, and then continued. "So, I'm the one to tell this family that I couldn't save their husband. I couldn't save their father, their brother, their son." I stood by and watched as their worlds crumbled. You ever seen that before? Tears welled along his lower eyelids. They didn't ask for that. It was just the luck of the draw. Garion takes another deep breath and then clears his throat. I turned on the AC for him. I could tell this was hard. He cast his eyes down for a moment and then nodded. "I told the family to stay away from the house for a few days. And then I went back to their house. I still had that filth bound. I was gonna make it beg the Lord for mercy." A sad anger bled through his voice. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I went back to that basement with Gloria. Together we were gonna make..." "Sorry, who's Gloria?" "Oh, I guess you wouldn't know that now, would you? Gloria's my morning star. Her and I have wrought righteous fury on many of their kind." A sudden little twinkle shone in his eye. "You have a fucking morning star?" Garion cringed a bit at the sudden increase in my volume. "Like, the stick with the metal pointing ball on the end?" His smile said enough. He didn't even have to say it. "That is correct." "Where did you get it? Can I get a cool weapon? Was it from the Renfest?" Hey, he said while putting his hand out towards me and slowly lowering it, politely telling me to shut up. "I guess you don't know that I forge and invent in my spare time too. You want a weapon, I'll make you one. Free of charge when we get back." I must have looked like an idiot with the way I was staring at him. I could have hugged him. I felt like a kid on Christmas. That would be so cool! Like anything I want? Garion had a big smile on his face. "Yep, anything you could think of, I can probably make it. But enough of that. What were we talking about? You were telling me about the venomous guy in hell." "Oh, right. Okay. So," he said quickly, "Gloria and I go to this basement where this waste is. For 3 days, we broke all of its bones over and over. I hated that I was too late to save him. I hated the way I felt talking to that family. We only caused a fraction of the pain it caused before the coward fled back to hell." "Oh, dude, what the fuck?" I asked before I even thought about my words. He looked at me, raising an eyebrow again. "That made you uncomfortable, did it? Maybe I should have chosen a better story to get that point across." He let out the rest of the breath in a sigh. "What? No. Will you be my best friend?" Both of his eyebrows shot up in a look of shock, and then he let out a hearty laugh which made the van swerve a little. "You really are something, aren't you?" "After working with Father Ralph, I kind of expected more of the same," I admitted, feeling a little guilty. "Father Ralph is dedicated," Garion said cautiously. "He could benefit from a bit more flexibility." I laughed. "Yeah, in a shower." Garion joined in the laughter for a moment and then said, "Listen, I know this job can be tough, but remember, it's not just about following orders. It's about making judgment calls in the heat of the moment. Trust your instincts and don't be afraid to adapt." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, feeling a new sense of best friendings with Garion. "No problem," he said, his eyes back on the road. "We're in this together. Let's make sure we get out together." We entered the backwater town of Millwood around 5 p.m., and at Garion's suggestion, we stopped at the local everything store. They had literally everything in one building. Convenient. But it smelled like cow shit. We pulled into the parking lot of the Old Western Saloon. 2 of the 3 front windows were broken, there was a hole in the porch, and there was a noticeable dip in the doorway's floor. This place? I asked, eyeing the ramshackle exterior skeptically. "Trust me," Garion said, stepping out of the van. "Old man Johnson runs this shop. And he's been around forever. He knows pretty much everything that happens in this town." I followed Garion inside, the bell above the door jangling as we entered. The store had these narrow aisles stuffed to the brim with junk, and the smell of dust and old cow shit graced the air. And behind the counter stood an old man with a long, scraggly beard, dressed in overalls and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He looked up as we approached, his eyes narrowing. "Well, I'll be goddamned," he said, his voice raspy but strong. "What in the hell do you city slickers want at this hour?" Garion stepped forward, offering a polite nod. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson. We're here to ask you about any disturbances around town." "Disturbances, huh?" Johnson spat on the floor, narrowly missing an old dog that lay curled up behind the counter. "Bunch of goddamn kids, probably. Always causing trouble." "Well, we think it might be something more than that," Garion said, his tone respectful but firm. "We need to know if you've seen or heard anything unusual." Johnson scratched his beard, eyeing us with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "You're not from around here, are you? Oh, what do you think, we got zombies or some shit? This ain't no goddamn horror movie." "No, sir," I cut in, trying to mimic Garion. "We're following up on a report from our company. Anything you can tell us, rumors maybe, be helpful." The old man let out a gruff laugh. "Well, shit. If it's information you want, I got plenty. But it ain't free. You got any cash, or you just here to waste my time?" Garion reached into his pocket and pulled out a few $20 bills, placing them on the counter. Johnson eyed the money and then snatched it up with a grin. All right, let's see." He leaned back, scratching his head. A couple weeks ago, folks started talking about the loved ones being dug up. At first it was just one or two, but then it started happening more, and no one's seen who's doing it, though, and could be some sicko, could be something else, hell if I know. "Any strange sightings or noises?" Johnson nodded slowly. "Yeah, now that you mention it, old Miss Harper swore she saw something moving towards the cemetery one night, and they said it looked like a walking scarecrow, but a little bigger. Scared the piss out of her, poor old bat." He spat another wad, barely missing the old dog again. "You'll find her about 3-minute drive up yonder, right side of the road. Just past the tire on the fence that says Harper." "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Garion said, his expression thoughtful. "We appreciate your help." Yeah. Johnson waved us off. "Just don't go causing no trouble, you hear? Last thing we need is some shit going down in this town." "We'll do our best," I said, giving a nod as we turned to leave. As we stepped back into the cold evening air, I looked at Garion. "What'd you think?" "I think it smells like cow shit. And we need to get to that cemetery," Garion replied, "before things get worse." "Get worse?" I asked, and then walked around the van while Garion started replying. I didn't hear a single thing he said. I opened the door and got in, and Garion was in the middle of the explanation. "And then we'll have to figure out where the—" "Wait, sorry, can you repeat that? I interjected, pointing outside. "Oh, no problem," he said, pulling on a seatbelt. "We're going to talk to Miss Harper and see if she can give us any useful information, and then we'll have to figure out where the best place to set up will be. We don't have much daylight left, so let's hope she's home." We pulled into Miss Harper's driveway about 2 minutes later. Garion gotta go fast. "You're gonna lead this one. You good with that?" Garion asked, looking at me as he turned off the engine. "Yeah," I replied, stepping out of the van and walking up to the door. Her house was a classic rural farmhouse, and probably built back in the 50s, 40s. Also probably still had lead in the original paint, which it still had, and gave it a kind of weathered charm. The garden was full of colorful gnomes, like at least 100 of them. A well-worn path led up to her front door. I knocked firmly, and after a moment, the door creaked open to reveal Miss Harper. She was an elderly woman, but you could tell that she'd been quite a looker in her younger days. She looked sharp, a little weary, a little scared. "Evening, ma'am," I began. "We're here to ask you a few questions about what you saw the other night." She looked me up and down, a frown forming on her face.
"Who told you about that?"
she asked, suspiciously squinting at me. "That would have been Mr. Thompson from the—" "Johnson," Garion corrected quietly. "Mr. Johnson, sorry. The one at the everything store." Her eyes relaxed slightly, and she opened the door wider. She stepped back and motioned for us to come in.
"Oh, come in. I don't want to discuss such things on the porch."
We entered her cozy living room, filled with antiques and family photos. She gestured for us to sit on the floral-patterned couch while she settled into an armchair.
"So, what do you boys want to know?"
she asked, folding her hands in her lap. We understand you saw something strange a few nights ago? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Can you describe what you saw? I remember what Garion did and pulled out a 50. I placed it between my fingers and held it out to her. But she didn't seem to notice, though. Instead, she sighed, her gaze distant.
It was late. Well past midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by that window over there, and that's when I saw it. Like some kind of sick man just moving along the old wagon road towards the cemetery. He looked like he was hurting something awful, but he was gone by the time I got outside.
Garion made me put away my money during her explanation. I nodded, and then probed the little old lady for a bit more. Did you hear anything? Maybe any noises that stood out? She frowned, thinking.
Well, there was a sort of whispering, but I couldn't understand it. It was like a scary story, all of them speaking at once, but saying different things.
That must have sucked, I said, genuinely sympathetic. We're going to do our best to figure out what's happening. Miss Harper's face had paled, and she seemed to withdraw into herself.
I don't want anything to do with that sort of thing. I've had enough scares in my life.
I realized I'd spooked her. We're here to help, Miss Harper. We just need your help to...
Help?
She scoffed, her tone growing sharp.
I don't see how poking around and asking questions is going to help anyone. You're just stirring up more trouble.
I held up my hands defensively. Look, we're just trying to do our job, ma'am. If we can figure out what's going on, we can do something about it.
Is that what you think?
She snapped, her voice trembling with anger.
You think you can just waltz in here and fix everything? You don't understand the kind of evil we're dealing with.
I opened my mouth to respond, but Garion intervened, his voice calm and soothing. Miss Harper, we're sorry if we upset you. We appreciate your help, and we just want to make sure that no one else is put at risk. She turned to look at him, her expression softening instantly.
Oh, my, such a polite young man. What's your name?
Father Garion, he said, offering a gentle smile. We're here to make sure that everyone in Millwood stays safe. If there's anything you can tell us, it would be a great help. She blushed slightly, clearly flustered.
Oh, well, Father Garion, it's just... I've been so scared since I saw that thing. You don't think it'll come back, do you?
We'll do everything we can to prevent that, Garion reassured her. Your description and the whispering are very helpful. Was there anything else you noticed? Even the smallest detail could be important. She leaned in, almost conspiratorially.
Well, now that you mention it, there was a strange smell, like rotting meat, and the air got so cold all of a sudden. It gave me chills. Do you think that means something?
It could, Garion said thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Harper. You've been very helpful. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at him, batting her lashes.
Oh, it's no trouble at all. Anything to help such a handsome young man. Are you sure I can't get you something to drink? Maybe some tea?
Thank you, but we need to get going, Garion replied, standing up. We have to check that cemetery before it gets too late. She placed a hand on his arm, her voice lowering to a purr.
Are you sure? I have a mean apple pie, Father. It would be a shame to leave without a taste.
Garion, seemingly oblivious, gently patted her hand. I appreciate the offer, truly, but duty calls. Her eyes lingered on him, her grip on his arm tightening.
Oh, come now. Surely you have a few minutes for an old lady. I could use some company. It's been so lonely around here.
He gently but firmly disengaged her hand. I really must insist, Miss Harper. We need to ensure everyone's safety. She pouted slightly, her eyes full of unfulfilled longing.
Well, if you must. But you come back and visit me any time, you hear? I'll keep my pie warm just for you.
And then she winked at him. Of course, Garion said with a polite nod. Take care, Miss Harper. As we left the house and headed back to the van, I couldn't hold back the chuckle. She really wanted to show you how holy she was. Garion shook his head, a bemused smile on his face. She was just a polite old lady and her information was useful. Maybe we'll stop by tomorrow and I can get some of her pie. I snickered again as I followed him to the van, almost forgetting that our next stop was the Millwood Cemetery. We pulled up to the cemetery gates around sunset, the rusty metal creaking ominously as we pushed them open. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. It made my stomach churn. Garion and I exchanged a glance. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and steady. We walked down the narrow dirt path, our flashlights casting eerie beams through the dense fog and tall grass. I flicked my light out into the open fields once, and it gave me the heebie-jeebies. I didn't do it again. The gravestones, some weathered and old, others newer and stark, loomed out of the darkness like silent sentinels. As we approached the center of the cemetery, a sudden unnatural silence fell over the area. Garion paused, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "This place feels wrong," he muttered. We stood in silence for a moment, listening to it, dissecting it for sound. A loud, agonizing scream ran out from the far end of the cemetery. I shined my light towards the disruption, but Garion grabbed the collar of my shirt and picked me up like a kitten. Then he effortlessly whisked me away like I weighed 10 pounds. I landed heavily on my ass. "What the fuck, Garion?" I was pissed. Looking back up, I watched as Garion put his arms up in a defensive X position and braced. "What the fuck?" I said under my breath this time. Then I saw why. From the direction of the scream, flying through the air, came a barrage of screaming, decomposing human corpses. "Get to cover!" Garion yelled. And then he was struck by the first corpse. The second one landed where I was. Another 4 or 5 were airdropped on us. They landed around Garion in human pretzel arrangements. The corpses were too destroyed to go anywhere. But they were fucking moving. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was looking at fucking zombies. I backpedaled, yet again saying, "What the fuck?" with a scared and quizzical inflection this time. "Run to the van and grab our bags," Garion commanded in a serious voice that was silent until then. Then he wasted no time once given the chance and started stomping on the heads of the undead people. I listened to what he said and ran back up the narrow path to grab our bags. I arrived a few minutes later, and the van was locked when I got there. "Shit," I hissed under my breath. Garion was too far away and too busy to help me with the keys. So I did what I thought was sensible and smashed the window to unlock the door. This set off the alarm. I popped the lock and clambered into the back of the van, grabbing the bags and leaving through the back door. I waddled back down the path as fast as I could. And something in Garion's bag kept poking the soft spot on the back of my knee, and I felt like Quasimodo or Igor as I limped along. When Garion finally came into view, I was surprised yet again. Garion had created a pile of corpses, and he was still throwing more on top. The pile was 5 or so feet tall, and some of the dead were still undead. They groaned softly, and Garion was covered in filth. His robes were worn, and this tattered glory. He looked like a serious badass. I think I had my moment like that during the rupture. I wonder if he saw. "These undead are too weak to even move," Garion said. "The spirit here must be afraid of us if this is its tactic. Set the bags down and help me out, will ya?" I went to set the bags down and helped Garion make his corpse pile. When we finished up, he sat heavily, leaning back against a small well that survived Z-Day. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes and breathing deeply. "Hand me my bag, would ya?" he quietly asked. I didn't say anything back, but I brought it to him. "Open the bag. Look for a small red pouch. Oh, about the size of your hand. It should be on the inside pocket somewhere." I found his pouch. "Got it. Here." I handed him the red bag. Garion lightly took it from me and pulled out 3 unmarked, repacked capsules. He swallowed them dry like a goddamn psychopath. "We're working with a semi-mature demon," he informed me from the ground. "This means we're lucky and unlucky." "Why unlucky?" I asked, wondering if it got worse than raining zombies. "Because that means we don't get the luxury of learning what it is and then setting up. We have to take care of this tonight." After a few more minutes, we were making our way through the cemetery, heading towards the origin of the scream. The smell of decay steadily grew stronger, and Garion had us stop to put on these cool filter mask things. It helped dull out the smell, but it did little to shake this feeling of fear that was growing in me. Garion broke the silence after a bit longer. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean?" I asked, taken off guard. "What are you doing here? You know, what's your reason for risking your life?" "Oh," I responded, pausing to think a moment. I like money, I guess." Garion stopped and turned around to look at me, making me stop. "If that's your reason for being here, then you need to go back to the van. I can handle this. You'll get paid all the same." His presence suddenly felt overwhelming. "What?" I stammered. "No way! I'm not letting you do this alone." "Risking your life for money is a fool's trade. I will not let a fool risk their life." His words cut me kind of deep. I mean, I guess money isn't all of it," I mumbled, feeling embarrassed. Garion glowered down at me. "Then what is it? Why do you risk your life?" "Well, because..." I felt unready to say it, but Garion's intensity and the years that have crawled by since it happened crushed the thin veil that was holding it all back. "Because no one saved my sister when she was possessed." Silence. I felt the hot tears begin to run down my cheeks. Garion held me in his gaze, and then his shoulders relaxed. He wrapped me in his arms, and I let it all out. Look, I know that's cheesy, corny, boring, whatever, but I'd never known that feeling until then. I didn't know that I was still hurt. I thought I got over it. Maybe I'll tell you guys about my past some other time. It's easier to talk about them now. Anyway, Garion let go and apologized, acknowledging that he pressed me a little too hard at a bad time. I collected what dignity I felt I had left at the time, and we carried on, making our way deeper into the cemetery. The darkness was oppressive, creeping in from all sides, and the fog was thick AF. The stank of decay also got way stronger, even through the filter masks we wore. Just breathing sucked. Garion was leading the way, and several times I thought I'd lost Garion in the thick fog, only for him to appear out of the blue. Or gray, I guess. Garion moved with a purpose that was almost unsettling, considering he had taken those mysterious pills earlier. Despite the injuries he had sustained from the barrage of undead, he pushed on without the slightest hesitation. His robe was torn and stained, and I could see the blood seeping through the fabric on his right arm where something sharp had cut him pretty deep. "How are you holding up?" I asked, my voice muffled by the mask. Garion glanced back at me, his eyes hard but not unkind. "I've had worse," he said, his voice steady. "Focus on the task at hand. We have to be close by now." As if on cue, something cried out in pain. They sounded almost crazed. Garion was gone in an instant as he darted off towards the noise, leaving me behind. At first I panicked, but then I remembered I'm a whole grown-ass adult. Fuck that fucking shit, you know? I put on my big kid pants and ran to the noise, my flashlight beam bouncing weakly as it struggled to cut through the fog. I was almost to the noise when I suddenly fell into a hole, and my stomach dropped with that bleh feeling it gets when you think there aren't any more stairs left, but there was one more, and that supposed to be solid ground actually becomes a void. I had that feeling, but it lasted so much longer. My belly button punched the other side of the hole, knocking the wind out of me, and then I flopped backwards because physics and bounced my brain bucket off the wall before I finally landed heavily on my ass at the bottom of the 6-foot hole. I was in a fuck damn grave. I didn't have any cool one-liners or anything. No one was there. And I really just kind of sighed and crawled out of the hole and kept going, but with a little more caution this time. I came upon Garion's pack on the gray brick path and slowed down. It wasn't zipped and I could tell some stuff was missing, but I didn't know what. I dropped my bag with his, suddenly feeling a very malicious force watching me. The fog had begun to clear up and I could see. "Garion?" I called out, feeling on edge. I strained my ears to listen for a reply, but I was greeted by nothingness. I called out again, and Still nothing. I decided to open my bag to see if maybe Garion had packed like a walkie-talkie or something. There were some ninja stars. You already know that I kept those. There were also fruit snacks and water and pills that looked like the ones Garion took earlier. I grabbed 2 of those and popped them in my mouth, and then I chased them with the water because I'm not a goddamn psychopath. I continued to rummage through the pack, and in front of the exterior pocket, I found the walkie-talkie. I turned it on and spoke into it. Garion? Can you hear me? I waited for a few seconds before remembering the thing. Over. More listening. Still nothing. Feeling a bit dejected, I clipped it onto my waistband, grabbed the ninja stars, grabbed my salt, and continued walking. After a few more minutes of aimlessly wandering, I noticed I felt weird. I had a strange tingle in the back of my head, and my legs just wanted to go. What was even weirder was that the go-go feeling also had a destination. It felt like I was excited to go somewhere familiar. I felt the pulling in my thighs and my shins, between my toes. I didn't care where I was going. I was ready for whatever it was. My legs quickly picked up the pace, and before I knew it, I was running out of the cemetery. I didn't even think about stopping, though. I just needed to get to wherever I was going. Then my senses started to ramp up. My hearing, my vision, my sense of smell, all of it. It was like they got turned up almost twofold. A light breeze blew in across the field I was crossing, and on the wind was the smell of Garion. I broke out into an almost animalistic sprint once I smelled it. I was running towards it. I was running so fast that it felt like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I broke into a tree line about a quarter mile from where I started the sprint, and the smell of Garion amplified, along with the smell of blood and decay. I ran even faster, dodging and weaving through the trees effortlessly. I was running so fucking fast. It was like a dream. The trees flew by me in a blur, and my vision started to narrow in on something. I wanted the decay. The density of trees lessened, and I finally found Garion up ahead. I beelined toward him. I needed to be sure he was okay. I quickly closed in on him, and he looked up at me as I charged forth at a full tilt. He had a dumbfounded look on his face as I approached. When I got close enough to him, I tried to slow down so I could check on him. I also tried to ask him if he was okay. What I did instead was scream at him because I couldn't figure out how to make words, and I kept running right on past him. Weirdly enough, I didn't even care once he was out of my line of sight. My legs led me to a dusky-ass narrow mine shaft in the side of a hill. I could smell the decay inside. It hadn't occurred to me that I was probably running headlong into a pitch-black mine shaft by myself as I chased down what was probably a pretty nasty inhab. I just had to go fast. Thankfully, it was more like a cave after about 200 feet or so past the entryway. The narrow tunnel opened up into a surprisingly large cavern. Sitting in the center of the cavern, illuminated by a silver shaft of moonlight, was the pale and hunched inhab. Its bony back was to me, and I charged straight into it without missing a beat. It screamed in surprise at the sudden attack, and I held on tightly to the inhab as we slid across the rough cave floor. Before we even stopped, I was punching it in the ear. And we came to a stop, and I was fully wrapped around it. And I must have came at it like a spider monkey. My legs were wrapped around its legs, my non-punching arm was holding onto its chest, and my punching arm was punching it in the ear. It backhanded the piss out of me, and in a split second I felt my neck begin to overextend from the hit. I flexed and contracted every muscle to pull my head back down, and I stopped it from killing me. Quickly coming back to, I realized that I was on my ass and the inhab was up. I quickly rose to my feet and charged it again, ear-punching fist locked and loaded. I thought to throw my ninja stars, and I tried to grab just one, but I grabbed all of them instead, and I launched them like a shuriken shotgun. I don't think a single one landed. I didn't care, though. The inhab went from looking terrifying to terrified as I pounced on it. It was frail and feeble and skinny and partially metamorphosed. It had a few sharp teeth, a few normal teeth, pointy ears. Actually, you know what? It looked like a fucking goblin. Use your imagination. So anyway, I started blasting it with more wild punches. I felt like my entire purpose in life was to hit this thing, and I obliged. I knocked it down and pinned its head to the ground. And with my free hand, I mercilessly rained down blow after blow. I felt the face bones begin to break, and the screams quickly became garbled slurring. I kept hitting it long after it had died. After a minute or two, I finally began to feel satisfied. I leaned in close to the mushy spaghetti that was its face now and screamed, and then I dumped all the salt I had on it. I'd literally gone berserk. What I took was basically a wonder drug that induces an adrenaline-filled chem dump. Gary modified the drug further to have it change the way the body reacts to adrenaline, causing the intense heightened senses, speed, and focus. The tracking thing was new, though. He hadn't experienced that in his tests. Taking one would have been enough to basically raise the dead all on its own. But I took 2. Gary grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and lifted me off the body. I didn't know it was him at first and lashed out in a flurry. Gary fucking headbutted me, and that cleared me up enough to realize it was him, and that I could still feel pain. "How many did you take?" Gary asked firmly, still holding the collar of my shirt and preventing me from turning around. I screamed at him, but mentally I was trying to say 2. I wasn't out of my mind or anything, but there was a disconnect between the thinky bits and the doing bits. I tried again and screamed yet again. Gary wasn't the kind of person to ask a pointless question, though, and I knew I needed to answer him if I could. So I screamed twice, hoping he would get it. And thankfully he's a smart cookie. 2? He asked. I calmly screamed in reply. "Are you in control?" He continued. I shrieked at him again. "I'm going to let go of you. I need you to walk away from me before you turn around. If you turn around instead of walking away first, I'll have to immobilize you." I understood, and I took a few highly restrained steps away from him before casually turning around. Well, I meant to do it casually. Instead, I jumped and spun so fast my back popped. Garion was looking like a battle-worn paladin, totally badass. He reached out a hand that was holding a different pill. "Take this, it'll bring you down. You're gonna be okay tonight, but you'll feel everything tomorrow." I lurched for his hand, only meaning to simply move towards it. He expected as much, though, and didn't even flinch. I managed to get the pills from him and saw his now empty extended hand. I immediately followed up with a high five from my other hand and then quickly jumped backwards, swallowing the pill. Blah, 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 waiting for a few minutes, I finally came down. Garion went on to explain that he was tracking down that inhab, but that he was certain there was another one still nearby. I didn't have that oppressive sensation. My spidey senses weren't tingling. And Garion and I continued through the cave, and it began to reek. It was that rotting air smell again, like it was with Jerome. I immediately felt on edge, but Garion was on a different wavelength. He was almost jogging ahead of me, and I think he already knew what I didn't. A few minutes later, Garion called out from up ahead. "Hey, we're all right. Come here." I jogged over to Garion's side and was instantly repulsed by what lay there. Switch gears for me. This is going to be graphic. I want you to understand the severity of these inhabs, so bear with me. The man before us was the disgusting embodiment of living decay. It was like a show of the cruel sadism from the inhab that had taken residence within him. His flesh was a patchwork of necrosis and gangrene, mottled and discolored. The foul stench of rotting meat emanated from him, and it was a putrid odor that clung to the back of my throat. His skin hung in loose, tattered strips, revealing raw, oozing muscle beneath. Some areas had completely rotted through, exposing patches of bone glistening with pus and fluids. His limbs were swollen and misshapen, and probably swelling from the numerous infections that had set in and festered. Long, dark blisters covered his body, and some of them burst and leaked a thick yellow fluid. It dribbled down his ruined flesh. Open sores and ulcers dotted his skin, the edges inflamed and red, pulsating with every beat of his weakening heart. Maggots writhed within the wounds, feasting on the tissue. The man's eyes were sunken into their sockets, the sclera yellow, irises clouded, distant, disengaged. His mouth, twisted into a grimace of agony, revealed teeth that were loose and blackened, some missing entirely. His breath came in ragged, wheezing gasps, each exhalation accompanied by the sickly sweet smell of rot.
The gangrene had spread to his fingers and toes, turning them a dark, almost black color, and causing them to wither and curl as the tissue died and hardened. His chest heaved with effort, the skin there thin and stretched taut over his ribcage, which was clearly visible beneath. The veins beneath his skin were dark and prominent, filled with the tarnished remains of the failing organs he could no longer filter. Every movement seemed to cause him excruciating pain, and his body would occasionally writhe for only a moment. That was not just a man lying there dying. That was a man being consumed from the inside out, piece by piece. The sight was a horrifying example of the true nature of the entities we fought, and the price paid by those they possessed.
There's no more a man, nor a monster here. This is what happens when we're too late. This is what comes of those we cannot save. Garion, what do... But I trailed off. It was too much to take in all at once. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened, and he locked eyes with me. There was so much in that man's eyes. He convulsed as he drew in a breath while more of his body decayed and melted off his remains. And then he screamed. It was so loud, so raw. We would later learn the essential organs needed to prolong his death at that level of suffering were unafflicted. That included his mind, his heart, and his lungs. Garion stood up when he started screaming, and without hesitation he hoisted something off the ground, starting its motion swinging from behind his back, causing sparks as it slid along the stone. It left the earth and arced with a grace undeserving of the scene in front of us. I remember, for a fraction of a moment, it silhouetted and eclipsed the moon. And then he brought it down on the man's head with an earth-shattering force. Gloria. I think about that man often. I reflect on what it must have been like, living through that. Not only living, but truly experiencing the complete rot of your own body. It reminded me of Hisashi Aoichi. He was the technician who received the highest recorded dose of radiation during the Tokimara nuclear incident in Japan in 1999. His body suffered severe radiation burns and extensive damage to his internal organs and bone marrow. Despite his abhorrent worsening condition, medical to keep him alive for an extended period to study the effects of the radiation, leading to a controversial and painful ordeal until eventually he succumbed to his injuries. Sometimes I wonder where God is in moments like this, Garion said, just above a whisper, still gripping the handle of Gloria. Listen to me, he said, now talking to me while he was looking at the man. Sometimes the demons don't want anyone else. Sometimes all they want is the sick pleasure of destroying the one they possess. This is one of those demons. I'll save you the little details from here, as you're probably ready to go after all that. We made it back to the van, and the alarm was still going off when we got there. Garion cleaned Gloria with holy water, and we put up the rest of our gear. When we got back in the van, I realized my window had been rolled down the whole time. I didn't need to break the other window. We drove back home that same night, leaving Millwood behind us. And Garion and I don't talk about it anymore. But the courage that man had at that moment, the speed at which he reacted, it was a lot to witness. He was well trained in making those choices, and I would later learn about his past and the kind of people he used to work for and the kind of man he used to be.